I normally purposely avoid saying much about the biography of these thinkers because I don't want you to think of them as historical figures. I want you to hear their voices as challenges to you right now instead of trying to use an excuse that they lived a long time ago or it was such a different context. So I normally present them as if they're present tense folk. But Zinn is a different case just because I like him so much as a person. He died not too long ago, so this is past tense. But it was not very long ago, so this is a modern figure. But let me tell you about him. The formative moment of Zinn's life was when he was a bomber pilot in World War II. Now, he used the GI Bill to attend Columbia University and started studying history. And as he's studying history, some of his past experience as a bomber pilot started to make sense. Because what he found when he studied the history of France and Germany and these places is that some of the places he was bombing near the end of the war were already freed places. These were places in northern France. And what he found out is these weren't military targets at all. He found out that these were tests of some new armaments that they were working on, such as napalm. And so when he found this out, he had a radicalized sense of what U.S. history was like. Now, the most important thing that grew out of this is Zinn published a book called The People's History of the United States. And it has some really interesting statistics because it is one of those rare books that comes out, has a little bit of an impact, and then through word of mouth grows and grows in popularity. It is one of the only books in history that kept selling more and more copies for something like 30 straight years. Now, obviously, take like a Harry Potter book or something. What you get is growing popularity all of a sudden, and then it drops off. I mean, word of mouth spreads for quite a few years, but not that long. Well, this book had more and more impact every time it was taught, every time it was read, and so it spread. Now, let me show you that you have felt some of the impact of this book. Let me paraphrase a little line from the preface of it, and here is the interesting part. If you lived and studied history before Zinn came out, you would have a hard time finishing these phrases from the preface. But because and by the way, I'm on the other side of this. If I was your age, I wouldn't have been able to finish these phrases because I learned history after Zinn's impact. Good? So, the preface of his book says things like this. This is a very different history book. We are going to be studying the history of slavery from the perspective of fill in the blank. We are going to study the history of the women's rights movements from the perspective of fill in the blank. Now, you, as people on the other side of the way history is taught, can fill in those blanks because of a big impact of what Zinn had on history and how it's taught. The People's History is studying women's rights from the perspective of women. Studying slavery from the history of and perspective of the slaves. That's a radical departure. Now, what happened in history books after this book grew in popularity? Well, at first, publishers don't like to rewrite a whole history book and admit they are wrong. So what a lot of you dealt with in your history book, say in high school, was you would have the normal history of, say, Columbus or something like that. And then there would be a little gray panel inserted in the text that said, oh, actually, he killed almost everyone he came in contact with and rode on the backs of slaves to get around because he cared nothing about the indigenous people he encountered. Okay, fine. A lot of that is because of Zinn's book. What else? Now, when he started making a name for himself in history, the first big job he took was at Spelman College in Georgia. Now, this is traditionally an all-black college, so this very white, big-eared little historian, now, he didn't think of anything of it. He said, great, right? It's a good school. I'll teach there. But it was pretty remarkable that here's this little white guy teaching there. Anyway, The other fun thing historically, because I'm such a goofball, is looking at pictures of the civil rights movement. You see these marches, and what you find in these marches, and I think you'll find this interesting, and if you didn't notice it, is there's always a few white people stuck in those pictures, right? Here are these powerful black faces, and then you'll see a little white person scattered around. Well, a lot of times that's like a Where's Waldo book of try to find Howard Zinn in these photos. Because what he did is he was participating in the civil rights movement at this time while he's teaching at Spelman. And he realized, what a perfect opportunity to teach my students history. Let's see if they will participate. And so what you have is students of his that became major voices in these movements, like Louisa Wright Edelman, Alice Walker. And there's Zinn, little big-eared white guy. Now, lastly, another thing that is great about Zinn is just the personality of this guy. I think what they would call him was a people-loving troublemaker, to where everybody liked Zinn personally, even if you hated his very leftist ideas and his protests about how American history is usually taught. You still really liked the guy. He was the sweetest man. All right, enough. So why I think this little essay is important to include in an ethics class is because if people can't change their minds about ethical issues, and if we can't improve society by sharing these ideas and improve ourselves by changing our own minds, or me personally, if none of my students will change their minds about anything, then half of the point of this class is lost. And you, I hope, and I know, I'm just kidding, I don't hope. I know that you have ethical agendas that you care about. I know there are things that you want to improve in our society and community. And a lot of you, if I asked you, well, can people change their minds about things they believe deeply about, ethical problems? Can they change their minds about them? And at first, you would give me some cynical answer and say no. Right? Whenever I talk to my family members, they just get mad, or they say the stupidest, uninformed things, and that's usually the end of the conversation, and they don't even want to talk to me anymore. Of course. But I want to show you that that is not the actual case, that most people can change their minds. All right, so I'm over here by my bookshelf so I can stand up and so that I have room to fill in my drawings. Okay, so please, these are beautiful drawings. So what we want to do to make sense of what Zinn is getting at, and through other of his works, is we want to divide the population of any society into three groups. Now, they're uneven groups, so I usually draw this Venn diagram that looks like a baseball, right? So a little pie chart, right? And so we have these two small areas and then the big area in the middle. So first, let's talk about the two statistical minorities. One statistical minority, roughly like 5-10% of any population, are these radicals. These radicals that are, and I think I am one of them, right? So let's draw me in there, are these people that are quick to change their minds. They don't see being wrong as a threat. They see being wrong as a chance for improving themselves and learning. In fact, this book, The People's History of the United States, how you react to it when you read it, is a good test of whether you are one of these people. When I read People's History, I was so stoked to find out how wrong I was and to feel incredibly smart for not having these dumb ideas about U.S. history anymore. That made me feel brilliant and made me want to share all these ideas and quickly say, yeah, I didn't know this either, but did you know this? So I have also radically changed my beliefs about political issues, theological, religious issues. So I think I am one of these radical minorities that wants to find out what I'm wrong. All right, so that's the radical minority. Now, if you run into one of these people, give them baked goods because they will ask you for more books to read about what you care about. They'll want to know if they are wrong, and they'll be grateful for the opportunity to learn something new. All right. So now let's go to the other statistical minority. This is the roughly, again, say 10% of the population of any society that sadly just can't change their minds. Now, in this case, we will fill in. Now, this is, I don't want to say this because I hope she doesn't see this, but my mom is one of these. My mom is one of the nicest people on the face of the earth. She is incredibly sweet, but she has a hard time being wrong. For those of you in psychology classes, this is what's known as cognitive dissonance. This is the pain or stress or strain you feel emotionally when the world contradicts your beliefs. When information that you realize this might be true and it contradicts your belief, it hurts. All of us experience this cognitive dissonance. It's just whether we can push through it. Well, this small minority, about 10% of the people you'll talk to, have too much cognitive dissonance, or I should say it hurts too much, and so they can't face up to being wrong about certain things. Now, in my mom's case, she just prefers to change the subject or make some joke, usually make fun of me for being such a nerd. Again, she's incredibly sweet. Now notice, when you're talking to someone that is in this statistical minority, it doesn't help to argue. All you're going to do is make them more and more defensive. And so, when my mom, I can see her feelings being hurt a little bit if I challenge what a newspaper said, because she's an informed person. But when something in history or the newspaper is mistaken, and I point it out, I realize that I shouldn't press the issue. It doesn't help anyone. It will just hurt her feelings. It won't get us anywhere. So, I just move on. Now, lastly, what does this mean? Roughly 80%, the vast majority of people are in this middle group. This middle group are people that can change their minds. They're just not eager to do so. So what do they need to change their minds? Two things, very important to know. They need good information. So if you are sharing thoughts with someone and they disagree with you, you need to triple check that your information is accurate. Don't just look for websites that agree with you. Look for really core cross-referencing sites to make sure you have good information and have that information to share with people, because they need good information so that it can get through that cognitive dissonance. Second element is even more important. They need time. This cognitive dissonance does hurt, and you need time to be able to change your mind, because you have to reorganize all the thoughts that follow from those beliefs. So be patient. Again, now notice how this is now general advice. Getting in a conflict or an argument or a heated debate with someone that is like most of the population doesn't help. They need time. And if all you are doing is being rude and saying that they're wrong about something, that just is going to make them more defensive and do more rationalizing of why they're right. And this is when you hear the most ridiculous defenses of a position. That is because you have hurt their feelings and you have made them revert back into some irrational defensiveness. Stop it. Don't do that. It's not going to help. It's just going to make this change take longer. A simple example of this from my own life is my dad. Now notice, if you were to get into a basic ethics conversation with my mom and my dad, you would have them completely reversed. Because my mom's an excellent listener, she's very, very sweet about everything, and so you would think, oh yeah, she's one of those people that can change our minds because she's so nice, she's so eager to listen to me, and, just give her time. But actually, my mom is incredibly sweet, but doesn't like to change her mind. She has a really hard time with it. My dad, by contrast, he is more argumentative. He will get frustrated, right? He seems like he's in that other 10% that can't change their minds. But no, he is statistically normal. It just takes a lot of time. He will slowly digest some of the new information, and his processing period is quite literally like 5 to 8 years. For instance, for years, I've really desperately cared about improving healthcare in the United States. Our healthcare system is just terrible compared to so many systems in the world. But my dad would always defend it. He's a very he's wealthy, very pro-capitalist in so many ways, right? And so he would always defend it. He would think a lot of my ideas were ridiculous. Well, here's an interesting case. What happened through the years with my dad is he slowly started to share many of my ideas about healthcare policy, but, and this is fairly typical with the ordinary person, when he updated his positions and started realizing that to have everyone have access to healthcare in the United States is actually economically and morally a good thing to do, he adopted the new idea as if it was his idea the whole time. I literally caught him saying things like, well, you know, Jeff, I just think everyone should have Medicare. That's what I've always thought. No, I wouldn't say this, but that wasn't his thought at all. He would constantly say how people don't deserve health care and things like this. He changed his mind so much that he just assumed that was his position all the way through. Really fun. Anyway, so what is the overall point? Never get in conflict with people. It doesn't help. Be friendly so that you can share good information, and then be patient, and be very patient. Most people can change their minds. Thanks.